Chapter 1: A Chance Meeting. The city of Paris had always held a special charm for those who visited, but on this particular night, it seemed to shimmer with a magic all its own. The Eiffel Tower stood tall against the dark sky, its lights twinkling like a beacon of romance. For Sophie Bennett, a young artist from London, it was the perfect place to find inspiration. She had come to Paris to escape the monotony of her life, hoping to rekindle her passion for painting. Strolling along the Seine River, Sophie felt the cool breeze brush against her face. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her neck and took in the sights and sounds of the city. The streets were bustling with tourists and locals alike, but Sophie felt strangely alone. As she wandered, she found herself drawn to a quaint cafe nestled in a quiet corner of the city. She stepped inside, seeking warmth and a moment of respite. The cafe was cozy, with soft jazz music playing in the background and the scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Sophie found a seat by the window and ordered a cup of tea. As she sipped her drink, she gazed out at the city, her thoughts drifting aimlessly. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" Sophie looked up to see a handsome young man with dark hair and striking blue eyes standing before her. He smiled warmly, and Sophie felt an instant connection. "No, please, have a seat," she replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Thank you," he said, sitting down. "I'm Mark, by the way." "Sophie," she introduced herself, shaking his hand. "What brings you to this cafe?" Mark shrugged. "I was wandering the streets, trying to clear my mind, and I stumbled upon this place. It looked inviting." Sophie nodded. "I know the feeling. Paris has a way of drawing you in, doesn't it?" Mark smiled. "Yes, it does." "So, what brings you to Paris?" "I'm an artist," Sophie explained. "I came here to find inspiration and hopefully create something meaningful." "That's wonderful," Mark said, his eyes lighting up. "I'm a writer. I came to Paris for the same reason. There's something about this city that stirs the soul, don't you think?" Sophie agreed, and the two quickly fell into a deep conversation about their passions, dreams, and the beauty of Paris. As the night wore on, they lost track of time, captivated by each other's stories and the connection they felt. Chapter 2: A Night of Adventure. As the cafe began to close, Sophie and Mark reluctantly decided to leave. Stepping out into the cool night air, they both felt a sense of excitement and curiosity. "Do you want to keep exploring?" Mark asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Sophie smiled. "Absolutely. Let's see where the night takes us." They wandered through the streets of Paris, their laughter echoing through the night. They discovered hidden alleyways, charming squares, and beautiful bridges. At each stop, they shared their thoughts and dreams, growing closer with every step. Eventually, they found themselves standing in front of the Louvre. The Grand Museum was closed, but its majestic presence was still awe-inspiring. "Have you ever seen the Louvre at night?" Mark asked, his voice filled with wonder. Sophie shook her head. "No, but it looks incredible." "Come on," Mark said, taking her hand. "I know a spot where we can get a great view." He led her to a nearby park, where they climbed a small hill. From there, They had a breathtaking view of the Louvre, its glass pyramid shimmering in the moonlight. "It's beautiful," Sophie whispered, her heart swelling with emotion. Mark nodded, his eyes fixed on the scene before them. Paris has a way of revealing its magic when you least expect it. They sat together in silence, taking in the beauty of the city. Sophie felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. With Mark by her side, she felt as if anything was possible. Chapter 3: The Connection Deepens. As the first light of dawn began to break, Sophie and Mark realized they had spent the entire night exploring the city together. They made their way back to the cafe where they had first met, their hearts full and their minds buzzing with the magic of the night. "Do you want to meet again tonight?" Mark asked, his voice hopeful. Sophie smiled. "I'd love that." They exchanged phone numbers and made plans to meet at the same cafe later that evening. Sophie returned to her hotel, exhausted but exhilarated. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so alive. Throughout the day, Sophie couldn't stop thinking about Mark. His words, his laughter, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his writing, everything about him intrigued her. She spent the afternoon wandering the streets of Paris, sketching scenes that reminded her of their night together. When evening came, Sophie found herself back at the cafe, her heart pounding with anticipation. Mark arrived moments later, his smile as bright as the city lights. "Ready for another adventure?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Sophie nodded eagerly. "Lead the way." They spent the night exploring more of Paris, each new discovery bringing them closer together. They visited art galleries, listened to street musicians, and even danced under the stars in a quiet square. Sophie felt as if she were living in a dream, one she never wanted to end. Chapter 4: Unspoken Feelings. As the nights turned into weeks, Sophie and Mark continued to meet, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They shared their deepest fears and desires, finding comfort and understanding in each other's company. One evening, as they sat on a bench overlooking the Seine, Mark turned to Sophie, his expression serious. "Sophie, there's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Mark took a deep breath. "I've been offered a job in New York. It's a great opportunity, and I've always dreamed of living there. But it means I'll have to leave Paris soon." Sophie's heart sank. The thought of losing Mark was almost too much to bear. "When do you have to go?" "At the end of the month," Mark replied, his eyes filled with regret. "I don't want to leave you, Sophie. But I also can't pass up this opportunity." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes. "I understand, Mark. You have to follow your dreams. But I'll miss you terribly." Mark reached out and took her hand. "I'll miss you too, Sophie. More than you know." They sat in silence, the weight of the future pressing down on them. Despite the uncertainty, they knew they had to make the most of the time they had left together. Chapter 5: A Bittersweet Farewell. As Mark's departure date approached, Sophie and Mark spent every moment they could together. They continued to explore the city, their adventures tinged with a sense of urgency. They visited their favorite spots, took long walks along the Seine, and savored every second of their time together. On their last night in Paris, Mark surprised Sophie with a visit to the top of the Eiffel Tower. As they stood together, looking out over the city, Mark took her hand and pulled her close. "Sophie, these past few weeks have been the best of my life," he said softly. "I wish I didn't have to leave, but I want you to know that you'll always have a special place in my heart." Tears streamed down Sophie's face as she looked into his eyes. "I'll never forget you, Mark. You've changed my life in ways I can't even begin to describe." They shared a long, heartfelt kiss, their emotions mingling with the twinkling lights of the city below. In that moment, they knew that their connection was something truly special, something that would endure even after they were separated by distance. The next morning, Sophie accompanied Mark to the airport. They shared a tearful goodbye, promising to stay in touch and cherish the memories they had made together. Chapter 6: A New Beginning. After Mark left, Sophie felt a profound sense of loss. The city that had once seemed so magical now felt empty without him. But she knew she had to move forward and find a way to keep the magic alive. Determined to honor the time they had spent together, Sophie threw herself into her art. She created a series of paintings inspired by their adventures in Paris, each one capturing a different moment of their journey. Her work was filled with emotion, and it resonated deeply with those who saw it. Sophie also stayed in touch with Mark, their phone calls and messages a lifeline that kept their connection strong. They shared their successes and struggles, supporting each other from afar. Months passed, and Sophie's art gained recognition. She was invited to exhibit her work in galleries across Europe, her paintings praised for their depth and passion. She felt a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment she hadn't known before. One day, as she was preparing for a new exhibition, Sophie received a call from Mark. "Sophie, I have some news," he said, his voice filled with excitement. "I've been offered a job back in Paris. I'm coming home." Sophie's heart leaped with joy. "That's incredible, Mark. When do you arrive?" "In 2 weeks," he replied. "I can't wait to see you again." Chapter 7: Reunited. The days leading up to Mark's return were filled with anticipation. Sophie couldn't believe that the man who had captured her heart was coming back to the city where it had all begun. When the day finally arrived, Sophie waited at the airport, her heart pounding with excitement. As soon as she saw Mark, she ran to him, throwing her arms around him in a tight embrace. "I've missed you so much," she whispered, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I've missed you too, Sophie," Mark replied, holding her close. "It's so good to be back." They spent the day catching up, sharing stories of their time apart and dreaming about the future. Mark was amazed by Sophie's success and proud of all she had accomplished. "You've become an incredible artist, Sophie," he said, his eyes filled with admiration. "I'm so proud of you." Sophie's heart swelled with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mark. You inspired me to follow my dreams." Chapter 8: A Love Rekindled. With Mark back in Paris, Sophie felt as if her world had been set right again. They quickly fell back into their old rhythm, exploring the city and creating new memories together. Mark found a beautiful apartment near the Seine, and Sophie often spent her evenings there, working on her art while Mark wrote his stories. They encouraged and supported each other, their love and creativity intertwined. As the months passed, their relationship grew deeper and more meaningful. They traveled together, visiting new cities and finding inspiration in each other's company. They laughed, loved, and faced challenges together, their bond unbreakable. One evening, as they stood on the same hill where they had first admired the Louvre, Mark took Sophie's hand. "Sophie, there's something I need to ask you," he said, his voice filled with emotion. Sophie looked at him, her heart racing. "What is it, Mark?" Mark got down on one knee, pulling out a small velvet box. "Sophie, you are the love of my life. You've brought so much joy and meaning into my world. Will you marry me?" Tears of happiness filled Sophie's eyes as she nodded. "Yes, Mark. I will." Chapter 9: Forever in Paris. Their wedding was a celebration of love, creativity, and the magic of Paris. Surrounded by family and friends, Sophie and Mark exchanged vows in a beautiful garden overlooking the city. The ceremony was filled with laughter, tears, and heartfelt promises. As they danced under the stars, Sophie felt a sense of fulfillment she had never known before. She was married to the man she loved, living in the city that had brought them together, and pursuing her passion for art. Sophie and Mark continued to create, inspire, and support each other. Their love story was one of adventure, resilience, and the enduring power of following one's heart. They knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, hand in hand. And as they looked out over the city of Paris, their hearts filled with gratitude and love, they knew that their story was just beginning. The magic of Paris had brought them together, and it would keep their love alive for years to come. The end.